Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. We are going to start with a few opening prayers. There's a link to the opening prayers in the video description. We'll do this first one 3 times. Organ yugi numjan sam pemage sa dompola yatsen chogi ngorume pemajong ne jesura kordu kandro mangpo kor ketki jesuda druki jinji lopchi sheksu so guru pema siri home. Organ yugi numjan sam pemage sa dompola yatsen chogi ngorupne pemajung ne jesurak kordu kandro mangpo kor ketki jesudak drupki jinji lopchi sheksu so guru pema siri home. Organ yugi numjan sam pemage sa dompola yatsen chogi ngorupne pemajung ne jesudak kordu kandro mangpo kor ketki jesudak drupki jinji lopchi sheksu so guru pema siri home. And continuing on, we'll do these 1 time each. Kunzan dosem garab shiri sing pema kara jipani shunga sozo nimna taten gatsa so kate lama namla so waden. Ogmin choki inki pojana dosum sange kungi ngawonit rangsem choko ngutsun tonset pe tsawe lama namla so waden. Sashi pochu chuching me to chami rabling jini de kempadi sange zingdu mikte puai droku namda shingla chopashok tram uru ratna mandala putsa mega samudra saparana samaya. Samchen namki sampadang lo yi che chak chitawar che chon tomo tepahi choki korlo kordu so. All right, so now that we've invoked the blessings of the Buddhas and of the lineage, we're going to take a moment to just settle into our compassionate intention for being here today. Just take a moment to reflect on your reasons for listening to the Dharma, that we're here to develop our bodhicitta, to develop our wisdom and compassion so that we can be of the utmost benefit to all beings. All right, so today we're going to start with a short meditation. This is from Jetsuma's book, Stabilizing the Mind. And this is just a brief breath meditation. Meditation is the natural state of mind when it's relaxed, stable, and open. That's, of course, not the state of mind that our mind's normally in. Our mind's usually pretty rowdy and, running around wild like a monkey. And when our mind's in that state, really agitated, wound up, and out of control, the mind controls us instead of the other way around. So that's why we meditate. We meditate to create space in our mind. And In the same way, like we keep our body strong, we need to work the muscle of our mind in order to train it to be calm and relaxed, yet also alert and wakeful. And creating space in the mind also helps us to balance our emotions so that we can act more appropriately in our daily lives. So we have a little bit more space, so we're not just acting rashly out of anger. We can have a little bit of space, and that allows time for wisdom and compassion to arise in our mind and stabilize, so that we can actually act from that wise and compassionate place instead of our normal crazy place that we're at. So if we want to generate bodhicitta, the awakened mind of wisdom and compassion, we first have to calm our minds so that we have a stable environment in which that wisdom and compassion can grow and flourish. And there's not these strong winds of emotions that's going to blow it out and blow it away. So let's take a moment to focus on our posture. We're going to sit comfortably with our back straight. You can sit in a chair or on the floor, crisscross applesauce, or in lotus posture if you're flexible enough. And you can place your hands in your lap, on your knees, or you can put right hand over left hand like that and hold your hands below your navel. Allow yourself to relax completely and breathe normally. Now put a very light attention on your breathing. Don't try to control your breath at all. You're going to keep breathing in your normal rhythm. But just put the most gossamer thin attention on your breath. It's like taking your pulse. You're not trying to put any pressure on it or change it in any way. We're just observing it. Our attention is like a feather, gently riding on the surface of your breath. And our minds are going to come and try to distract us from our breath. And they'll come up with all sorts of brilliant ideas and horrible thoughts. Will make us feel like horrible people, or we'll feel like geniuses, or we'll remember that the stove's on, or whatever. But no matter what thought comes up, just drop the thought, return to your breath. Drop the thought, return to your breath. You don't have to look at the thought, just drop it and come back to that gossamer thin attention, like a feather floating on the surface of your breath. And we're going to do this meditation for 5 minutes. think it's really helpful to start classes with this short meditation, because it's so rare that we ever set our attention on anything single-pointedly anymore. I think people have had issues with that, being distracted for ages and ages, but especially in this day and age, and we've got social media and phones and 24/7 news cycles. It's we tend to practice a habit of really constant distraction, and we're invited to practice constant distraction at all hours of the day. So it's really wonderful to take just a few moments even and just rest our attention just on one single thing. Allows our mind to rest and allows for a little bit of space in the mind. So you can do that meditation at any time. Even if you're in a waiting room, or I don't know, you just want to take a few minutes before a meal, you can do that. Just anytime you can find a few minutes, you can meditate a little bit and bring a little space to your mind and start changing that habit of constant distraction. It's a very simple way to practice. And it's a practice that will benefit any other spiritual practice that you engage in, just by helping to stabilize your mind. So today I wanted to talk about generosity. We are, what is it, eight months into the pandemic at this point? 9 months, maybe it's 9 months now. 9 months in to this pandemic. And people are in all sorts of different situations. We really have such a wide variety of circumstances that people find themselves in during this time. Some people are working safely from home in relative comfort. Some people are working safely from home, but not relatively comfortable. Some people are at home trying to deal with online schooling, and there are some children who are staying at home doing online schooling while their parents are at work, and they're having to step up as a big brother or big sister, and take care of their younger siblings, because their parents have to work full-time in person, and schools are virtual. This is posing a really unique challenge for many families right now. You've got some people working in person, some safely, some not. And then many are without work. Many are worried about losing their homes. Many are worried about where their next meal will come from. And then there are many people who are already homeless and already hungry. And if it weren't for our phones and our news reports, those of us who are relatively comfortable may not even know about the plight of other beings, because we're here inside the four walls of our home, and unless you turn on the news, you might not know that there's food banks out there with lines of cars miles and miles long, of people waiting for food. You may not know that that's even happening. You might not be able to see that out your window. It's very easy for us to fall into the cocoon of our own comfort and close ourselves off to the suffering of others. We all live on a spectrum of wealth and need, and we don't know the details of other situations, so we can't judge them. Some people in line at the soup kitchen may look like they're well off because they're newly unemployed and they still have all their nice clothes. Others may look like they have very little, but they are content with what they have. We can only judge our own situation, our own wealth, and what we have to give. But rich or poor, we can all afford to deepen in our practice of generosity. The jewel of perfect generosity is a treasure far greater than any item you could ever give or receive. Each and every one of us will die someday. We don't know when, but we certainly will. And when we do, when we die, we won't be able to take anything with us, not a single thing. Not a thing except for the content and habits of our own mind stream. You can't take your money, or your car, or your house, or your iTunes library, or your family's heirlooms. You can't take so much as a penny or a postcard or a single photo. But you can establish a habit of generosity that lasts until and is part and parcel with enlightenment. Many of us, cocooned in our own comfort and our own selfish comfort, in that cocoon, we don't hear the cries of sentient beings. We aren't listening. We don't have a habit of listening. We've stuffed our ears with samsaric distractions and our own selfish contentment, forgetting that every single thing that we take for granted, for everything that we take for granted, there are other beings out there in need of that very thing. Clean water, toilets, waste management. Yeah, it's not sexy, but waste management is one of the greatest comforts of your life. Shelter, thermal control of one's environment, such as heat or air conditioning. Transportation, the ability to get where one needs to go easily. Family and friends. Consistently available, nourishing food. Even if it's bland or it's broccoli or whatever it is. I love broccoli, but even if it's bland or you don't like how it's cooked, if you have consistently available, nourishing food, you are wealthy. Clothing that is in good condition and appropriate for the season. These are riches that we often overlook. When we're comfortable, we may forget that there are others who aren't so comfortable. We also forget that our own circumstance could change at any moment. And then when we're in need, we can also be blinded by our own suffering and forget that there are others out there who are suffering just like us, and even worse. And then whatever our situation is, we wrap it up in pride, thinking, I'm rich and he's poor, and I'm helping him because I'm a good person. Jetsama says that we are always in a state of judgment. If we're high, others are low. We're always thinking like that. And it blinds us, it limits us, and it stops us from being generous. It stops us from being truly generous and truly compassionate. It limits us from even understanding what compassion truly is, which is beyond that sense of us and them, of me and you, separate. Jetsama gave a teaching after the 2004 tsunami in which she referenced a teaching that Jesus gave. Jesus taught that it is easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than it is for a prideful person to enter heaven. And she explained that in ancient Jerusalem, there was a single gate that went into the city. And the gate was very low, very small. And in order for a camel to get through it, he had to get down on his knees and crawl. So that teaching that Jesus gave is an indication that pridefulness is the obstacle. And yes, Jesus is from another religion, but we can still learn from the truth when the truth is said. So this teaching is an indication that pridefulness is the obstacle. It's the truth. Pridefulness is the enemy. Instead of that pridefulness, we need to develop an awareness that we are all the same. We are all of the same nature. Jetsama said, instead of that pridefulness, when we get ourselves all ready to pray, we should do like the camel, get down on our knees in a way internally and say, here are my brothers and sisters, some of them swept off the face of the earth by this giant wave. Some of them are hungry. They've lost their families. Many of them are in the bardo. If no bodhisattva had prayed for them, they might still be even in the bardo at this time because it often takes 49 days to escape the bardo. It's only been about a month. And this is right after the 2004 tsunami, but I think we can still apply this to our current situation in the pandemic. We have so many people dying around us and so many people who are losing loved ones. And she says, boy, if that doesn't move you just to think about what that's like. And so when we think with that kind of compassion and consider the situation of other sentient beings, rather than just worrying so much about ourselves, to simply consider their suffering, to keep one's ears open to their calls, to their suffering, and to recognize that they are the same, not higher, not lower, the same. Each in their nature is the very Lord Buddha. Each in their nature will someday be enthroned as Buddha and will save other sentient beings. There is no difference. The haughtiness that we have, the games that we play, it's got to go. We may not even realize or be thinking of the fact, even when we make these judgments, of I'm high, you're low, or I'm rich and you're poor, or whatever, or I'm poor and you're rich. And either way, when we make these judgments, we forget that any wealth that we have or any lack that we have is the karmic result of either our generosity or our miserliness in previous lifetimes. If we don't have what we need, that is a sign that we have not been generous in the past. And people contain multitudes. You may have had a period of time in which you were generous. You may have had periods of times in which you weren't. And so if you are in a time in your life when you are experiencing lack, you are experiencing the result of the karma you created at a time when you were not generous. And it's an indication that you don't have a strong habit of generosity, that you need to be cultivating that. And when we do have wealth, we only have that wealth not because we're special, not because we're great in any way, or that has anything to say about us as an individual. That wealth is simply the karmic result of a time in the past when we were generous. And so we need to build on that generosity. We can't, we need to make sure that we make a habit of that generosity. We can't just sit on our laurels and assume that we've attained it, we've got riches, we're good, we're set. Like, you can't just assume that. If you don't build that habit of generosity, your wealth will disappear eventually, and you'll be destitute again, and you won't have created the causes in order to have what you need in future lives. So this wealth, or the lack of it, is simply the result of one's own actions. It has nothing to do with your inherent worth. Inherently, we are all the Buddha, but we don't realize it, and that Buddha nature is concealed by our bad habits and our afflictive emotions. And so, we need to always be looking to see what the habits are that we're creating in our minds. When we find we don't have enough, Jetsam has taught in the past that, when you notice that you don't have enough, you can reflect on that. You can say, well, this must mean that I have not created the causes to have what I need in this moment. This means I have created the causes of I've been miserly in the past. I've been stingy. I have somehow have not managed to cultivate a habit of generosity, and I am experiencing that now. I can see the proof of that right now. And so we can look and see, what can we give? How can we turn that train around? What can we do? What do we have to give? And it's not that, you might think, sometimes it does happen where you may turn that around in that moment. You may say, well, this is proof that I don't have a strong habit of generosity. I need to do something generous now. You might turn that around and find something to give and give it away. And you might see a result. If you're lucky enough, if any of us are ever lucky enough to experience instant karma, it's a wonderful blessing to be able to see the results of our actions quickly. But that's not always the case. You may, right now in your in your home, find something that you have to give. You don't have much, but you find something you have to give, and you may not see any immediate result. But what you will see is for that habit, that mental habit, to start changing. That habit of finding contentment with what you have, finding what you have to give to others, you'll start seeing a loosening in that state of attachment and grasping in your mind. There was one time when I was fairly poor. I was in my early 20s, and I had a period of time when I had very little money, and I remembered this teaching that Jetsama had given, and I remember her saying that when she would have periods of time when she didn't have enough, she would look around her house and she'd find what she had to give, and she would give it. And again, not because you think that it's going to change your current circumstances, but because the lack of generosity in your mind stream is an issue that you want to address. And so I took that advice, and I, at this time when I really didn't have very much money, I had struggled to save up money to take my clothes to the laundromat, to wash my clothes. And so I had just done that. I was thinking, like, boy, I am pulling quarters out of my couch cushions so I can wash my clothes. Like, this is, oh crap, that means that I don't have a habit of generosity. I have not, this is a symptom of my own lack of generosity. I need to address that. So I said, what do I have to give? And this was during the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And where I was living, there were many people who were homeless on my street. And so it was very clear to me that even though I felt a lack in my life, I still was incredibly wealthy compared to many people who I talked to on a regular basis. The people who I would pass on the street, I had far more wealth than they did. And so I immediately, I had bread and peanut butter and bananas. So I made sandwiches, and I made sack lunches for everyone on my block, for all of the people who were homeless who were on the next couple of blocks. And, I don't say this to lift myself up, but just because this was Jetsama's advice. And immediately I saw that difference in finding the contentment in what I did have. And that loosening, that feeling the grasping of, I don't have enough, I need, I don't have enough, that grasping starts to loosen. You say, wow, I have so much to give. I have so much, there's so many people out there, there's so many beings out there that need something that I may have to give. And it's incredible. It's incredible medicine. Generosity is incredible medicine for that sense of neediness and grasping. So even when we do hear the cries of beings and we feel moved to give, we often don't know how. We give selfishly. We hold a mirror up to ourselves to admire what generous, loving people we are. Or we give in a miserly way, like a rich person who buys beautiful, nice things for themselves, but will only give to others their tattered last season sweaters. Someone who is very rich may donate what seems like a lot of money to a particular cause, but for them it's just chump change, barely noticed. They're not really digging deep to give to others. And of course, unless you're paying someone else's bills, you don't really know their situation. But we can be mindful of our own situation and be truthful about what we can afford to give. We sell ourselves short. We can afford to give more than we are. Even when we really dig deep into our pockets, our generosity is often clouded by pride. We have to let go of that pride, of that identity of the giver, the dualistic idea of the beggar. What would it be like to give without making it all about you? And Jetsama says, so what we do now is we kind of adopt that posture of a clear hearing of the calls of sentient beings. I hear you. I am not separate from you. And we think about the three precious jewels. We have to hear the cries of sentient beings and then remember that they are the same as us. It could easily be that in the next lifetime, we are in their position and they are in ours. So there are three types of giving. Three types of, actually first. So let's talk about giving and the practice of transcendental generosity. So Khenchen Palden Sherab Rinpoche says, the aspect of bodhicitta, which manifests in effortless response without grasping or ego clinging, is transcendental generosity. This is the opposite of attachment and territoriality, which looks like greed or clinging to thoughts and feelings, clinging to possessions, not wanting to release your grip or let the object out of sight. Like grasping. That is the opposite of transcendental generosity. Khenchen Palden Sherab Rinpoche says, when bodhicitta radiates without holding on to anything, when you freely give away things that belong to you without any expectation, doubt, or regret, this is the perfection of generosity. And there are three kinds of generosity. The first is the generosity of wealth. The second is the generosity of knowledge. And the third is the generosity of protection. So generosity of wealth, fairly obvious. The generosity of wealth is sharing material objects or resources which we own and are able to give to others without regrets or without any expectations of return. And we can practice generosity of wealth to our own capabilities. We want to do something that we feel happy with afterwards. You don't want to just caught up in the exhilaration of the moment and give away something that you will later regret. If you end up feeling regret, you'll have spoiled your effort. So, you also don't want to look back and feel like what you gave wasn't enough, or that it was a bad idea, or that what you offered was kind of ridiculous. You want to feel good about what you gave. So we must understand our own capacity to practice generosity so that we can be happy with our actions in all situations. And whether our offering is big or small, whatever we have to give it right. Do it right. With the right attitude and the right motivation, which is to give solely for the benefit of others, not for your own reputation, not for your own personal gain, not so that others look at you and think you're a really swell guy. Give because you have something that will benefit others. Give for their benefit because this is something that they need. And you just happen to have it. Jetsuma says, we are the same as them. It is our privilege to benefit them, a privilege. When I think of my students and their great potential, I hold them up above my head. I am privileged to participate in their unfolding. It is a privilege to honor you. No, not the personality. You understand? You. That which you are. And so it's that kind of posture. Untangle your pride. Sometimes you just have to untangle it. It's like a constricting force on your heart. It keeps you from opening up. It keeps you separate. It keeps you miserable, and it affirms samsara every day. It's like you're going, Om Samsara home. You know you're praying for suffering with pridefulness. Do you realize that? I bet you've never thought of it that way, but you're actually praying for more suffering, praying to continue in the land of lost ones. So we are taught to lose that prideful stance. If we drop that pride and we give with courage and a joyful attitude, with a real compassionate motivation, then our capabilities will grow. They'll continuously expand and evolve until our generosity is without limit, until our generosity becomes immeasurable. So that's what we want to do. A great example of this type of generosity is Pachel Rinpoche. Pachel Rinpoche was a wandering renunciate practitioner. He lived in the 1800s. And he's one of the most revered spiritual teachers in Tibetan history. And he's a beautiful example of this joyful attitude. Because whenever Pachel Rinpoche would see beggars approaching, he'd become extremely happy, as if something absolutely wonderful was coming his way. he preferred he preferred the entreaties of these beggars to ordinary normal conversations. And when the beggars would come to his tent, if Pachel Rinpoche was able to give them everything that they had begged for, he became even happier than the recipients of his gifts were. For instance, when some poor Mani stone carvers, when they would come to his tent and ask Pachel Rinpoche for help with food or clothing, tears would well up in his eyes, and he would physically become weak. If he happened to have something to give away, he would give it away in an instant, so joyous. And when he had nothing to give, he would be sad, and he'd say, "What's to be done?" and just stare off in space in anguish. So once a poor stone carver came to visit Pachel Rinpoche and begged him for some money. And Pachel Rinpoche sensed that this stone carver was a bit greedy. But he didn't say like, "Oh, you're greedy, no, I won't give to you." He didn't have that judgment like that. He listened to the cries of this sentient being. He heard what this being actually needed. And so he said, seeing that this man needed to build in his mind the habit of contentment, what he said was, "Just repeat the words, 'I don't need this money,' and I'll give the money to you." And the man was like bewildered, and he didn't say anything at first. So Pachel Rinpoche repeated his instruction 3 times, and eventually the man said, "I don't need this money." And Pachel Rinpoche then gave the money to the beggar. And this was following in the steps of the Buddha himself, who had done the exact same thing when a greedy Brahmin had been watching him. Someone had offered to the Buddha a rich sweet, and this greedy Brahmin was watching and saying, "Can I have that?" And instead of saying no, the Buddha said, "Just say, 'I don't need this sweet,' and I'll give it to you." And so then when the Brahmin did as he was asked, then the Buddha gave him the sweet. And he did that. When he did this, the attendant asked him, "Why did you do that? Why did you make the man say, 'I don't need this sweet'?" And the Buddha said, "For 500 lifetimes, this Brahmin has never once uttered the words, 'I don't need.' Since he has never said it, I requested him to do so, repeating after me the words, 'I don't need,' in order to create in his mind the habit of contentment." So we don't have the wisdom to see what others need and don't see, but we can take that, we can take that advice for ourselves though, and we can do that to ourselves. When we find ourselves really feeling like we need something, feeling grasping, "I need this to be happy, I need this," maybe give that advice to yourself and say, repeat these words, and then you can have it. "I don't need the brownie. I don't need the brownie. I don't need the brownie." Then have your brownie. We can work with our own habit of contentment, which ties directly to our habit of generosity. So then once, for a few days in a row, there were no poor people coming to Pachel Rinpoche's tent. No one was coming to his door begging for help. And so because no one was coming by, and people would make offerings to Pachel Rinpoche, and so with no beggars coming by, all of the food and money and various other things that had been offered to Rinpoche, they started to accumulate in his quarters. And he became very unhappy with this increasing pile of offerings. And so he told his 2 students he told 2 of his students to go leave at once, go find some beggars around and bring them back. And eventually the disciples returned with a bunch of destitute Mani stone carvers. And Pachel Rinpoche exclaimed, "Isn't this great?" And he began gathering up all of the offerings that had been piling up. And the instant that the beggars came into his room, before they could even open their mouths and ask him for anything, Pachel Rinpoche started tossing money and food and these other goods at them, shouting, "Here you go, here you go." And soon he'd given away every single offering that he had. And after the Mani stone carvers had taken all of his offerings away, Pachel Rinpoche said with great relief, Isn't it fantastic finally to get rid of all that dreadful stuff that's just been lying around like an old corpse slowly going to rot? So that is an excellent example of a real mindset of generosity. You know, feeling dismayed at the amount of things that you have all to yourself. That's not how we normally feel. We normally feel really like, ooh, I've got this. I've got all my nice things. We don't think in this way that Pachel Rinpoche thinks. Of how wonderful it is to give other beings what they need. How wonderful it is to take from myself and give to others. How wonderful that is. The generosity of wealth can be divided 3 ways. There's 3 subdivisions: small generosity, medium generosity, and great generosity. Small generosity is like giving a penny, $1, some water, some fruit, you know, small items. It's easy to give in this way. Medium generosity is giving bigger things, like a car or a house. Great generosity is much greater. Khenchen Palden Cherub Rinpoche says, great generosity includes the giving of one's own body or life to others if it would benefit them. In previous lifetimes, Buddha Shakyamuni gave all of his wealth, even his life, to benefit other sentient beings. These were very high generosity practices. The Pachel Rinpoche is also gives us a great example of great generosity. Pachel Rinpoche always emphasized meditating on the Four Immeasurables. The Four Immeasurables are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and impartiality. So he never failed to recognize the importance of regarding every sentient being as having been at one point or another our own kind mother, who took loving care of us, and you know, with heartfelt benevolence, he would wish that each and every being could find happiness in the causes of happiness. When we do that, that might stay kind of a mental exercise. We might not really believe it. We're like, yeah, I really think all sentient beings should be happy. And then we might kind of stop there. Easy to say the words. And Pachel Rinpoche really, really meant it. He truly believed it and lived with this kind of impartiality and compassion. And while he was staying at the Changma Hermitage, Pachel Rinpoche would go off into the forest on summer afternoons to a place where there were swarms of big black horseflies. And he would take off all of his clothing and lie down on the ground. And soon his entire body would be black, just completely covered in horseflies. And Pachel Rinpoche would stay like that for many hours, just laid out on the ground naked, letting the horseflies just bite into his flesh and gorge on his blood, these ravenous horseflies. You know how much, I mean, if you've been bitten by a horsefly, you know how much they hurt too. He would just lay there, letting them feast on his blood. And eventually he'd get up and get dressed, and he'd say to his heart disciple and attendant, Lungtok, he'd say, yeah, time to go home. And then the next day in the afternoon, he would say, yeah, let's go back to the forest and make more offerings. And he would go and do it again, lay out there for the horseflies to suck his blood. And that is incredible, incredible compassion, and be able to do that and without developing any animosity, to hold a mind of compassion, to hold that sense of joy, to feel joy that the horsefly is finding nourishment, even when it is painful and digging into your own flesh. Like, wow. Wow. That is some real bodhicitta. So the second type of generosity is the generosity of knowledge, which is an even higher practice than the generosity of wealth. And Khenchen Palden Cherub says, this knowledge generally refers to the wisdom which dispels ignorance, Dharma teachings. The Dharma is based in love, compassion, wisdom, nonviolence, truth, and honesty. Sharing Dharma with others helps reveal their inner nature while removing their obscurations. This is the gift of true knowledge. So to practice the generosity of knowledge, it's crucial that one has the right motivation. Offering knowledge must come from a true bodhicitta motivation, from a disposition of love and compassion. It should not be stained by a desire to glorify one's own personality or to enhance one's reputation. You shouldn't be trying to trick others or outsmart anyone or gain any kind of worldly benefit, to get rich or anything. It should not be motivated by any worldly desires. Khenchen Palden Sherab says that one must be motivated by love and compassion, cherishing beneficial thoughts for all sentient beings. And that this type of generosity is to be practiced according to one's ability to invoke inner wisdom and remove the obscurations of other beings. However, everybody does have these capabilities to some degree. And if you can share some knowledge of the Dharma with others with a good motivation, even a single word is a great gift. Many of the Buddha's teachings are observable to anyone, like the truth of impermanence. So even something like reminding someone of the fact of impermanence, that can be a great gift. Khenchen Palden Sherab says that even a word of the Dharma, says it will give them a clear signal and open a path toward a life of wisdom and an understanding of the true nature. So again, Pachel Rinpoche is a beautiful example of generosity of knowledge. So Pachel Rinpoche was a contemplative and a scholar. He wrote many profound treatises and poems. His best-known work is The Words of My Perfect Teacher, which is a book of instruction on the preliminary practices of the Nyingma school. And that book has been translated into many languages and is revered by all 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. He also collected and wrote down the pith instructions of his own masters. And Pachel Rinpoche had a remarkable memory, learning most of the oral teachings that he heard by heart. And he was thus able to elucidate the most complex aspects of Buddhist philosophy without referring to a single page of text, even when he taught for months at a time. He taught followers of all schools without partiality, and he gave teachings that pointed directly to the heart of spiritual life in a way that was immediately accessible to even the most simple-minded listeners. So we can see in that even, we can see the dedication. We can see he continually gave knowledge. He continually gave it again and again and again. And also the way in which he gave knowledge, and that he practiced impartiality. And he didn't just teach for one type of being. He taught for his teachings could be applied by those who are very knowledgeable and also by those who didn't even know how to read or write. And a little story about Pachel Rinpoche. Above Dzogchen Monastery in the glacier wilderness, there was a large boulder. And when Pachel Rinpoche taught the Dharma, he would sit on top of the boulder so that everyone could see him. And once he started teaching, he was utterly immovable, just like the boulder. Rain or shine, Pachel Rinpoche would not get up from his seat until he had finished whatever teaching he was giving. And then Pachel Rinpoche would point to the massive rock and tell his students, when you see that immovable boulder, let the very sight of it bring into your minds an unshakable aspiration to benefit beings by attainment. If we are not qualified to share the Dharma ourselves, we can still support efforts to make the Dharma available to others. We can facilitate the teaching of Dharma. In doing so, we will create the causes to continue receiving Dharma teachings and progress in our own understanding until we too can teach others. The third type of generosity is the generosity of protection. Kenshin Palden Cherub says, the generosity of protection involves preserving the lives of others. It applies to situations such as knowing that someone is going to be killed or executed and helping them escape, or compassionately offering ransom, or in less extreme cases, doing whatever you can to help protect the lives of others. This applies to all sentient beings, not only certain groups, but to any sentient beings you see who is going to die or be killed. Offering this kind of protection is very, very special. It is a great gift because life is precious to everyone. We have many, many opportunities to practice the generosity of protection in large and small ways. Many of the ways that we can engage in the generosity of protection are quite easy to do. If you think about the current situation of our world, simply wearing a mask is practicing the generosity of protection. We are saying that I could potentially be harboring a virus, and out of consideration for those around me, I'm going to wear a mask and protect all beings from any danger that could be present here. Even something as simple as wearing a mask can be really quite a profound practice if we do it with the bodhicitta motivation and dedicate the merit. We also have, right now that it's the issue of police brutality and the history of racism in our country. And, I think all countries have racism to some degree or another, but in our country, the history of racism is quite pronounced and results in many unnecessary deaths every year. So anything that you can do to, whether that's donating to an organization, to, there are apps you can have on your phone where, for instance, you see an infringement of someone's rights, you can photograph it and send that straight to the ACLU. You can act as a protector, you can act as a witness when someone is in danger, you can call for help when someone is in danger. But we can also work, for instance, you can write to your legislators and say, protecting all lives is important to me. Black lives matter. Can you do more in your job to protect Black lives? Can you do more in your job to protect Black trans lives? Think about those people who are the most at risk in your community. Who are the people who are the most at risk of dying? What can you do to protect them? If you're living in a place where, for instance, I'm originally from Arizona, I lived in Arizona for many years, and the Navajo community, for instance, is getting just pummeled by the coronavirus. The COVID-19 is just really hitting the Navajo Nation hard. So if I was living in that state, how can I help those who are the most in need? Not just my family, not just my friends, not just those who I know in my little pandemic pod, but how can I help those most in need in my community? What can I bring to them? How can I help even change the structure of our society so that things aren't so imbalanced and so they have what they need and their lives aren't so at risk? We can find many ways to notice who is at risk of losing their life, who is at risk of being killed, who is at risk of being executed. How can I protect them? What can I do to protect them? There's a story of, and then there's also, those are ways that we can do that are very feasible ways for us to protect others. And then when we really work up to it, there's, we can, there are even stories of the Buddha, for instance, giving his own life for the protection of others. There's a story in one of the Jataka tales. Buddha Shakyamuni related how in ancient times he was once born as a young prince with 2 older brothers. And once they were walking in the jungle and came across a tigress who had given birth to 5 cubs about a week previous. And it had been so long since this tigress had eaten food that she didn't have the milk to nourish her cubs. They were all very weak, and it was getting to the point where the tigress was going to have to eat something or she would die. And if she died, basically she didn't have anything to eat around her, so her only choice would likely be to eat one of her own cubs. And if she didn't survive, how would her cubs survive? They would have no way to. So she really needed something to eat if any of these 6 animals were going to live. And so the youngest brother, who later became Buddha Shakyamuni, he was moved by great compassion, and he asked his older brothers, what kind of food do tigers usually eat? And they said they eat meat or flesh. That's all really that tigers eat. And so he asked, well, how are they going to get meat? And one of the older brothers said, by the looks of that tiger, I don't think she has enough strength left to hunt. So unless somebody comes and gives them some meat, they'll probably all die. And so they kept walking. And the younger brother just kept thinking about this, and he was so moved with compassion. And he said to himself, I must save them from dying. I've used up so many lifetimes in this world without benefiting others, and now finally there's something I can do. This is a chance to do something useful with my body. I can save 6 beings. And so he thought about it deeply. He decided what he was going to do. And he said to his brothers, oh, sorry, I dropped something back here. I'll be right back. I just dropped something. Just wait here. And he ran back down the path. And when he returned to the tigers, and he could see they're so weak and they're near death, and he looked closely at them, and without blinking, he made a great dedication prayer saying, I'm giving up my life to save you all. When I become enlightened, may I be able to share wisdom so that I can free you all from suffering forever. And then he lay down on the ground in front of the tigress, but she was so weak she couldn't do anything. She couldn't even swipe at him and kill him there. So he got up and he got a piece of bamboo and used it to pierce his body, and then laid down in front of the tigress again, and she started licking the fresh blood and gradually got enough strength to eat the young prince. So that is an extraordinary example of generosity. And the Buddha always cautioned beginning practitioners never to do this type of action unless they have already realized the first ground of the bodhisattvas, the first bhumi, which is the understanding of emptiness, so that you can handle the sacrifice. Otherwise, you'll jeopardize your continued progress on the path of the bodhisattvas. So no human sacrifice today, okay? But this is an example of the type of compassion that we can aspire to. And there are many other teachings like this one. For example, great bodhisattvas like Shantideva have prayed that they could become medicine to heal all sentient beings and prolong their lives. These are known as life-giving generosity practices. Making aspiration prayers like Shantideva did is a good way to start engaging in this practice. Khenchen Palden Sherab Rinpoche says, in the process of giving to others, it may sometimes look like you are seriously reducing your wealth or resources, but that is a very short-term view. Actually, you accumulate merit and increase your wealth by giving things to others. When the farmer plants seeds in the earth, it might appear that he's wasting provisions by spreading so much of his grain on an open field, but in the future, it will bring even more food than he had before. If we want a tree to develop nicely, we might cut a little bit off here and there so that it will grow even more beautiful. Whatever you give will come back to you more abundantly than the amount you originally gave. And he says, when you give wealth generously, it will increase your wealth. If you give knowledge generously, your wisdom will deepen. Everything returns in kind, depending on what you offer to others. Buddha said that if you want to be rich, you should never ignore the practice of generosity. The result may not come as immediately as you expect, but it will definitely come sooner or later. Many great masters have said that through the practice of generosity, you accumulate a treasure so great that it will never end. So, and also I think, hearing these, I think it's so important to reflect on the stories of the great masters and see what it truly means to be generous, what great generosity really looks like, because we often fall into very small-minded thinking. Then we give a little bit and we think, oh, I gave so much, I'm done, I'm gonna go watch Netflix. And we just, we don't even understand how high the bar is. Okay, we set a very low bar for ourselves of what it means to be generous, and we need to expand that. So often we give a little bit, and then we think like, oh, I'm all maxed out, that's all I've got. And then if you've got a guru, especially like maybe if your teacher is Jetsma, for instance, then Jetsma may be like, get out there and give more to beings, and you start feeling like Scotty on Star Trek, and you're like, Captain, I'm giving her all she's got, and you just feel like you don't have anything more to give. You're tapped. You're done. You feel like you're sucked dry. Or like, I gave money, I gave effort, I volunteered on a Saturday. I've given it all. I'm tired, and we get tired and we feel dry because we're giving from this limited self, this limited just sack of bones that we are. We're just giving from this little limited self. And when we find that we have reached the limits of our generosity, what we need to do is we need to be like Scotty. When Scotty says he's run out of power, he says he's gonna he's got to fix the wires, he's got to redirect energy from the warp core, he's got to somehow get more energy to it. He doesn't just give up and say that's it. And our warp core is the 3 jewels. That's the radiant sun, the endless source of energy is the 3 jewels. So don't just give from your stupid little energizer battery self. Give from this great immeasurable sun of the 3 jewels. Like, wire up to that. Wire up to the 3 jewels. Wire up to your guru. And when you mix your mind with your guru, when you mix your mind with the ultimate bodhicitta, that sun of radiant compassion that gives effortlessly, without question, without thinking of any return, and we wire up to that, we find that we can give without limit. So I hope this has given you some food for thought about how you might deepen in your own practice of generosity, and how you might do more for others, how you might give more intentionally, how you might improve your motivation for generosity, and how you can deepen in your practice, how and mix your mind with the mind of the guru, connect with the bodhicitta, connect with that, and give everything you have. Really give from your heart to others. When we engage in generosity or any virtuous action, we should dedicate the merit to all beings. And that way, even small positive actions become meaningful. As Holiness Pachel Rinpoche says, once we have dedicated a virtuous act, it is sealed, and the merit can't be destroyed by any negative emotions. The Dharma practices we engage in always include a dedication at the end, so naturally we do them. But you should also dedicate any other virtuous actions you perform, since you don't know when they might be exhausted due to your afflicted mind. It doesn't matter whether the act is big or small. It must be dedicated for the sake of all beings. Even if you offer just a single incense stick or 1 flower or recite a single mantra, it must be sealed by dedicating it to the benefit of all beings. So let's do that now. We're going to say the dedication prayer that is on the last page of the opening and closing prayers. By this effort, may all sentient beings be free of suffering. May their minds be filled with the nectar of virtue. In this way, may all causes resulting in suffering be extinguished, and only the light of compassion shine throughout all realms.